What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing an updated Darth Maul hero guide, as I'm sure you've all noticed that he has changed very dramatically in the last few months with the addition of both his stamina and his block features. I have been contemplating for quite a while now whether this needed to be updated, but I realised that he's just far too different than what he was when I made my last hero guide, and so I am going to try and do my best to keep all of these guides as up to date as possible. As for my other guides, I do still have Leia, Iden, Chewie, Finn and Phasma to do still, so they are still on their way. It's just a matter of how long it takes to get the footage and stuff like that. Plus Phasma, Finn and Chewie are all getting buffs in the coming weeks or months, so they will still take a while before those ones arrive. As for the characters that I have already done, let me know down below if there are any that you think I should redo. Characters such as Kylo Ren, Obi-Wan, Grievous and Yoda, for example, all have changed a fair bit, but again, I've sort of been contemplating whether or not to redo them, so let me know down below if there is any that you guys would be interested in. But anyway, with all of that out of the way, we are going to go ahead and get stuck right into it. So we're going to start off with Maul's base stats, and like I mentioned in all of these hero guides, these were tested in arcade, so while I'm 99% sure all of these stats do transfer over to multiplayer, just bear in mind that there is always a chance that some stats may change from arcade to multiplayer. So if you see any stats that don't seem right, then definitely feel free to let me know down in the comments. First off, we're going to take a look at his base HP, and he does have a pretty decent health pool coming in at 700, although that is actually the equal lowest of all the saber users in the game. In saying that, 700 HP is still higher than most of the blaster users, so it's definitely nothing to worry about, but just keep that in mind when you do come up against another saber user. On top of that, he does have 250 health regen, which is up there as pretty much the average health regen of all the saber characters in the game, and so despite the slightly lower HP, he definitely has nothing to worry about when it comes to his health. Now, his weapon of choice is of course his iconic double-bladed lightsaber, and this is something else that has dramatically changed in recent times, getting not only his stamina changes but also getting a fairly hefty damage buff. It deals 120 damage from the front and 150 damage from the back, which is enough to one-hit kill regular classes from behind, and this has been one of his most notable changes since his previous stats were 100 and 120, which as you can see is a fair bit different. On top of that, he does actually have one of the fastest swing speeds in the game, almost swinging twice every second, meaning he can take out any class in just over 1 second, and with his massive saber lunge on top of that, his saber has finally become a very deadly weapon, because before these changes he was slightly on the weaker side compared to most other saber users. Like I mentioned, he does also have the ability to block now, and his stamina is what I would probably consider to be medium. When I tested it out, I think he could swing 14 times before it was drained, and I think he can block 10 saber attacks before it drains, so you can see from that ratio that he is still meant to be an offensive player rather than a defensive one. Now, keep in mind these stats are tested against heroes rather than troopers, and so there is always a small chance that they could be slightly different, especially in multiplayer, but as far as I can tell, these stats do all transfer over to Galactic Assault exactly the same as they are on your screen. Now, moving on to his abilities, and he does have a fairly decent set of abilities. None of them are necessarily anything special, but they do mostly serve their purpose very well, and they're far from being bad abilities when you compare them to some of the others in the game. His L1 ability is called Furious Throw, which has a very nice 8-second cooldown, and this one causes Maul to send his saber flying through the air, damaging anyone that it hits along the way. It does deal 150 damage per hit, meaning that it will take out all regular classes other than the heavy, and it can sometimes deal damage on the way back to his hand too, meaning if you can hit the enemy twice, you will actually deal up to 300 damage. This ability is really useful for taking out enemies at a bit of a distance without the worry of having to chase after them, and essentially it's an almost risk-free way to try and get a kill, as it won't usually put you in much trouble at all. With that being said, it is known to be extremely buggy, and it has been that way since launch, so you will find that a lot of the time it just simply won't work, which can be very frustrating to say the least. To be fair though, it has definitely gotten a lot better since launch, but even then it is still pretty buggy at the best of times, and probably more than 50% of the time it doesn't work in the slightest, so just make sure to keep that in mind as well. Moving on to his L1 R1 ability, and this one is called Chokehold, which has a bit of a longer cooldown, coming in at 17.5 seconds. This causes Maul to force choke his enemies before throwing them away, dealing 77 damage as well as removing anyone from within the area of effect. It does look like a one-hit kill in the footage you're seeing on screen, but that's only because the force abilities seem to insta-kill in arcade mode, so it doesn't quite have the same effect in a multiplayer setting. This ability is effectively a stun ability, as it does make the player unable to move for a few seconds while they're being choked and thrown through the air, so it is definitely a very useful ability in the right situation. Its only issue is that it does have a fairly slow animation that leaves you completely open to attack, so you do need to make sure you only ever use it when there aren't another couple of enemies nearby that can take you out in the meantime. With that being said, Obi-Wan and Vader have received changes that allow damage reduction when using similar abilities, so if you're watching this a while after it comes out, then he may actually get damage reduction while using his chokehold. It can also work against you at times, as sometimes it will throw the enemy to safety. For example, you might throw an enemy into a room where they're protected by a whole squad of enemies or something like that, so although most of the time it is a great ability, it can definitely have its setbacks every now and then. Moving on to the R1 ability, which is called Spin Attack, which has a very fast 5-second cooldown, and this one is probably his best and definitely his most versatile ability. Just as the name suggests, this will send Maul lunging forward in a spinning motion, dealing 100 damage to anyone that he hits. This does also allow some extremely fast movement and is a lot of the reason why Maul is so agile compared to the other heroes, and so this ability is definitely useful in a bunch of different ways. Spin Attack is super useful when it comes to chasing down enemies or finishing them off. If you're in a tight situation, it is always a really good tactic to strike the enemy once with your saber and then actually use the Spin Attack to deal a second blow while also getting out of the area much quicker, meaning you're a lot less likely to take damage and at the same time guaranteeing you the kill. As for its weaknesses, to be honest, it doesn't really have any. The only one I can think of is that it sometimes can lead to you falling off a map if you aren't paying attention, but for the most part it's almost a flawless ability, as there really are no downsides at all if you do play it smart. So that's it for all of his base stats and abilities. Now we're going to move on to some of the more important stuff, starting with his best star cards for Galactic Assault. Obviously it really does come down to personal preference, so these definitely aren't the only cards that you can use, but these are just the 3 or 4 cards that I think are the most important and most well suited cards for Galactic Assault. So the first card I'm going to recommend is his Wrathful star card, and this is of course his health on kill card, so this is by far his most important card to choose. I'm sure you guys know the drill by now. This will award you with 20 HP per regular trooper kill and up to 100 HP per villain kill, depending on how much you've upgraded the card. The next card I'd recommend using is the Flow Motion card, and this one allows you to have an extra spin attack at the cost of a slower recharge. Now, the slower recharge can be a little bit of a problem at times if you do get too trigger happy with the ability, but for the most part this card will mean that you can use the spin attack more often, which is definitely worth equipping the card for. For me personally, I'm at the point where I actually can't play more without using this card, as the spin attack is such a vital ability when it comes to both getting kills as well as surviving, so this one is almost a must-have card in my opinion. The third card I'm going to recommend is his Lightsaber Defense card, and this one will make Maul receive less overall damage from blasters by up to 16% when fully maxed. This is a very handy card when it comes to survivability, but it does also come down to your own personal playstyle, and so it can also be swapped out for another card if this one isn't really for you. If you are inclined to leave this card out, then the next one I'd recommend using is the Unrolled Grip card. This will give Force Choke an increased area of effect by up to 30% when fully maxed, and this can be so helpful since the choke ability is essentially a get out of jail free card. Now, like I said, these are the 3 or 4 cards that I'd personally recommend using. However, if you do disagree, then definitely feel free to let us all know down in the comments section, as there really is no right or wrong when it comes to something like choosing star cards. So now moving on to some of the best maps to choose Darth Maul on when you're playing Galactic Assault, and the top 3 that I've picked are Naboo, Tatooine and Kashyyyk. I think most people would probably agree that Naboo is one of his best maps, as he's so good in close quarters areas, and the same thing applies to Tatooine as well, since that map is similar in terms of the urban style layout. As for Kashyyyk, this is just a great map for the villains in general, and once you've gotten past that halfway mark of the first phase, he can be absolutely dominant in and among all of the Vreeds and around the 2 Juggernauts. Now obviously this doesn't mean that these are the only 3 maps that you would choose him on, and to be honest, Maul can pretty much do well on every single map in the game, but if I had to pick 3 maps that I could only ever play Maul on, then these would definitely be my own personal choices. As for some maps to avoid, and to be honest, I'd actually have to say that I don't think there are any maps to avoid choosing Maul on. You can adapt to different playstyles depending on the map, so overall there aren't really any maps that you shouldn't choose him on if you do get a chance. Now, as for some tips for Galactic Assault, and the main one that I would have to say is to make sure you're always on the move no matter what. Maul is easily the most well-suited saber character when it comes to an aggressive playstyle, and despite finally having a block ability, he is still played best when you rush around the map and try and be as deadly as possible. He's by far the fastest saber user in the game when you take his spin attack into account, and so you should always try and use that to your advantage, not only in an aggressive way, but also when you do need to quickly run to safety. Spin attack is easily his most vital ability, and there are plenty of situations where you can use it, but the best way to use it is to sort of get into the populated areas by using it, quickly take out a few enemies and then quickly dash off with the spin attack again before you do start taking any damage. One of the keys to staying alive longer with Maul is by killing as fast as possible, and in relation to this spin attack there is also a way that you can do that, which I did actually mention earlier on, almost combining his attacks with a quick exit as well. If you get within range of an enemy, swing once and then instantly tap R1 to use your spin attack. You'll deal that initial damage and then almost instantaneously you'll quickly dash out of the area, dealing the second blow on your way out. This is a really good way to get a kill, gain back some HP, while also getting out of trouble as well, or even if you're just in a one-on-one, then this is still a very fast way to just take out your enemy. One last thing that I've found is that now that he has a block, a lot of people think that he can be played more defensively, and sure, he definitely can play more defensively than he used to when he didn't have a block, but by no means is he a defensive player at all. Like I mentioned, Maul is played best when he's being aggressive, and his playstyle is still similar to what it was before he didn't have a block, being that sort of in and out style of player. However, now that he can block, you should still use it when you do need to. Just remember that his block stamina isn't the greatest, so while it is sometimes necessary to block in those sticky situations, you should never stand there like Obi-Wan and deflect enemy shots. Instead, you should hold the block and then instantly start thinking your way out of the situation into a more safe area. It does take quite a bit of practice to figure out when and when not to attack with Darth Maul, but at the end of the day, if you are playing it too safely or defensively, then essentially that can be even more dangerous than an aggressive playstyle. Make the most of his speed and agility, avoid situations where you can back yourself into a corner, and with a bit of practice, you guys should be running around dominating with Maul in absolutely no time at all. So that is going to be it for the Galactic Assault tips. Now we're going to move on to some tips for the hero vs villain game mode. So starting off with the best star cards, and the first one I'm going to mention is the unrolled grip card, which like I said before, gives the chokehold ability an increased area of effect. Again, Maul does finally have a block, but it's not something to rely on too heavily like I mentioned earlier, so the chokehold ability is a great way to get enemies out of the way and allow you to put the fight on your own terms. The next card I'd recommend is the flow motion card like I mentioned earlier. The extra spin attack works just as well in these modes as it does in Galactic Assault, so definitely a very handy card to choose. As for the third card, this one does come down to two different options that I tend to change up depending on the map or how good the enemy team is. One card you can use is the Wrathful card, which is his health on kill card like I said earlier, and because of his aggressive style, this can be useful since regardless what you do, you will generally take a fair bit of damage playing Maul in HVV. If you're playing on a map with no boundaries though, then the Forceful Thrust card should replace this one, as this will allow you a much better chance at throwing your enemies off the edge of the map. On any other map though, throwing your enemies further away will actually work against you, so I'd only recommend using this on maps like Kashyyyk, Kamino, and just about any map with no edges. So these are the 3 or 4 cards that I personally use in the hero modes, but again, that doesn't mean that these are the only cards to use, so definitely feel free to leave your own cards down below if you do tend to disagree with my choices. Now, moving on to some tips for the hero game modes, and with his block, he is now a beast yet again since he can block Anakin's abilities, as well as being much better suited for taking out blaster heroes as well. Just like I mentioned for Galactic Assault though, despite his block being very useful, it's not something you should rely on too heavily, as once the stamina goes, you're going to end up dead about 9 times out of 10. The same aggressive playstyle I mentioned for GA applies to these game modes as well, so try and stay on the move as much as you possibly can while sticking close to your teammates, and essentially your job in these modes should just be to be as much of a menace as possible, damaging enemies and then dashing away to safety for a few seconds, then hitting them a few more times and so on. If you combine your attacks and blocks with your spin attack and chokehold abilities, you can genuinely be a massive pain in the ass for the other team. By getting in there and attacking enemies will often still be used to Maul having no block, so they're going to try and take you out quickly, leaving them open to even more attacks from you and your teammates. Now, in terms of some of the characters to watch out for in these modes, I'd definitely have to say that Anakin, Chewie, Obi-Wan and Han Solo are very deadly against Maul in the right hands. It'll probably be a recurring theme in these hero guides that Anakin and Chewie will cause you guys a lot of problems. The reasons why are pretty self-explanatory, so you can still take these guys out, but just keep in mind that they can also end you very quickly. As for Obi-Wan, his mind trick right now is completely bugged in that it actually removes Maul's block when he's hit by it, so if you see Obi-Wan, do your best to try and stay away, and if he does hit you with the mind trick, then it is definitely best to try and jump and get somewhere relatively safe, otherwise he can actually take you out before your block even returns. This will no doubt get fixed at some point in the future, but for now this is definitely something you need to keep an eye on. As for Han, well, he's just the same old Han. Give him a few seconds where you're not blocking and he can absolutely melt you and then throw down his detonite to finish you off, so just pay very close attention if you do see an enemy playing as Han. So that is actually going to be it for our updated Darth Maul hero guide, guys. Hopefully he doesn't get changed much in the future, because I think he's pretty damn balanced as of right now, and I also just don't want to have to update this guide again, so hopefully this is the last one for Maul. If you did enjoy the video, then make sure to leave a like down below. Not only does it help support the channel, but it does also show me that you guys do enjoy these updated hero guides. Like I said at the start, there are still a few that I need to cover, as well as a few more that probably need to be re-updated, so keep your eyes peeled on the channel over the coming weeks and months. If you are new to the channel, then definitely feel free to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you don't miss out on any more Battlefront 2 videos or live streams. Thank you all so much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.